let's get into a video titled Wokeness, the New Western Morality by Douglas Murray, shared by John Anderson. Shout out to John Anderson. If you guys want to watch the entire video by itself, you can click the link below and you can do so. But as far as this video, we're going to be doing a back and forth dialogue. I'm going to give my 2 cents every now and then. So sit back, relax, get yourself some water, and let's get into it.
Started to notice in the last 15 or so years in particular was that effectively a new metaphysics, that is, a new foundational morality appeared to be getting installed in our society. And it went something like this. And again, one can regret this or admire it, but I think most people will recognize something like it. That not very long ago, if you wanted to be seen to be an ethical or good person, there were certain things that were perhaps expected of you. Broadly speaking, they were the inheritance of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And this included things like charity, forgiveness, virtue as understood in that tradition, and a lot more. And then at some point in the last 15 years, I say sped up very clearly in the last 10 years and then weaponized in the last 5. We see this another form of morality, not totally dissimilar in some of its appearances. And that is that in order to be a good person, to be seen as a good person in a society like Australia or Britain, you would need to stress, for instance, that you were anti-racist, as if everybody else in society was profoundly racist and you were one of the few brave souls willing still to battle racism. You would need to present yourself as being entirely on the side of women in any and all circumstances and really talk about it an awful lot. You know, if you're a man, stress your feminist credentials, a tendency which, as you know from reading The Madness of Crowds, I'm intensely skeptical of. You need to talk about LGBT.
We have never been in a better time in human history. That is a fact. Statistically speaking, on every single marker, we are safer than we have ever been. We have, especially in the Western world, greater legislation towards human rights than has ever existed in human history. And yet, we have ramped up the quote-unquote activism, fighting for these causes, and even pointed to them as the societal ills. The reason why an individual cannot get to a certain level in their life is simply because of all these structures that are in place, which many of which have already been dismantled in a real way, right? Such as racism. On a daily basis, I will hear somewhere that the reason why somebody who is of melanated skin, the reason why they cannot get ahead. Well, actually, I used to hear this when I lived in the Bay Area. I lived in the Bay Area for 17 years, so it was much more common. Now I'm kind of out in the countryside, so thank God there's a few more rational-minded human beings who just want to live their lives instead of virtue signaling. But yeah, in essence, I would find myself in conversations predominantly with white liberals who, you know, saw it as their place to continuously tell me of the ills and the woes of the world and how racist the world was and how racist they were, right? And they would acknowledge their racism. They were coming to the wrong one, in essence. But yeah, it's incredible how we've ramped up. Like, and maybe he'll get into this because I haven't actually seen this specific video. Maybe he'll get into the subject of just how, you know, this is a means of creating a synthetic purpose for oneself in order to create a certain level of I guess to have a mission in your life. If you don't dive into the purpose that God gave you, the Creator gave you, that you are here to fulfill, then you will create what's called like a shadow career in essence, or what Stephen Pressfield would have called a shadow career, which is the thing next to the thing or a completely dark version of it. Instead of going out and building, you become a builder of imaginary castles, right? You become an individual who's playing video games all day and building in a synthetic world as opposed to in real life building a real world experience. And so, you know, many of these individuals are using this woke mentality as a means to kind of fulfill the purpose element. Then obviously there's also, you know, fulfilling the inner shame, the feelings of unworthiness, inadequacy, etc., and guilt that already existed, and now is just manifesting as, you know, quote unquote white guilt. So they see it as their mission and purpose in life to eradicate that guilt by, you know, bowing the knee to the ones who say that they are the biggest problem. People who always blowing my mind, and I'm gonna get back into this. You were born in 1986, and yet you believe that you owe a debt due to somebody who lived in 1786. Think about that. Like, if I was indebted to my grandfather's sins, I would be cooked. But, maybe that's just me.
Matters of crowds I'm intensely skeptical of. You need to talk about LGBT all the time, or at least as often as possible. And these, as well as a few other things, you might add in green and perhaps a couple of other things, became what you stress in order to show that you're a good person. Now, these in the end, I started to realize, were becoming load-bearing walls, which I became very worried about, and am very worried about, because they can't bear the load. My view is that LGBT rights, equal rights for women, equal rights for people, whatever their racial origin, is a very desirable endpoint. But it's an endpoint of liberalism in the good sense, as we might understand it. It's a hideous foundation. Why? For two reasons in particular. The first is that all of these bases for a new morality have intense friction among themselves. So, as I point out in the trans chapter, trans and women have intense friction as rights claims for reasons I explain. Trans and gay have intense friction between them for reasons I go into in the Madness of Crowds. But there's a second reason as well, which is that all of these things that we have been in societies like Australia trying to base our morality on are themselves much more unstable components than we've been willing to admit. So I say in the gay chapter at the outset, and I do gay at the outset partly because it's the only one of these minority things I can claim to have any crampons on the wall of the important Everest of liberal rights. Gay is much more unstable than we're willing to admit in our societies. We still don't know very much about it. I think we have to be a bit more humble about some of the issues around it as a result of that. But I get on then to the women chapter, and I say, this one also is much more unstable than we're willing to admit. Are women and men exactly equal? Are men more competent than women in certain areas? Are women more competent than men in certain areas? Or have we, just for convenience for the time being, landed, for instance, in this strange place I think we're in, where we have to pretend that women are exactly the same as men and also magically better?
This is a powerful point. I did a video where I use this analogy of, imagine the NBA had a requirement where they had to have a group of 5 foot and below individuals, like an entire team, just one team dedicated to 5 feet and below. So 4, 4, 6, 4, 3, 4, 10, etc. Right? And if you're living somewhere else in the world, that's like, that's basically like a minion-sized human being, right? Dwarf, whatever you may call it. These individuals may very well love the game of basketball, but them being in the NBA, due to their own genetic structure, will lead to their suffering within that game because they're not made for it. So if somebody said it's not fair that they don't get to play the game, and we have to create equality by putting them on the same playing field, that person is going to struggle because it's not what they were born for. It's not what they're intended or purposed for. And so we're trying to force everybody to be the same thing, right? Even when he, brings up the concept of like, trans rights and then women's rights, how they intersect and actually cancel each other out in a lot of different ways. We're now having issues where women are now having to fight for their right to just play their sport and, to compete within their sport without having men stepping in who, are transitioning into, quote unquote womanhood, right? That's the entire concept. And now it's like, wait a minute. No, these are dudes stepping into our domain. And these individuals' rights, these people's rights are being basically put as a priority above these young women. For example, in San Jose, where I was raised, there is a university, San Jose State, where there is a trans woman, quote unquote, who plays for the volleyball team. And so Nevada, I believe, was headed to play them in some very important game, and they opted out because they said, we can't play against somebody who's a biological male, somebody who has been known to dominate, somebody who almost cracked somebody's face open, on a serve. So they made their decision, and they were criticized, they were ridiculed, they were actually ostracized, they were canceled, as opposed to, the ideology that claims to be protecting and caring so much for its people has now turned on itself. And so that concept has also always it's confused me, but then when I dug into it, I realized this isn't on a basis of logic. This isn't about biology for these people. It's about again what they call virtue signaling, which is being seen and perceived in a specific light. That's all it's about. It's about perception. It's smoke and mirrors. It's not reality. It's not grounded and founded in actually having the greatest desire for good for society, but instead for the individual to be seen as better than the next individual, seen as a higher moral grounding than the next person. So again, I haven't seen this video, this specific one, but he's really, really unpacking it. I'm doing my best not to stop at every 7 seconds. I really am, because there's so much here.
We're very uncertain about this. We tend to be totally certain. We're very uncertain. Race, absolute mess, which we've been trying to think about and deal with as well as we can, but there's a whole load of hell waiting for us if we keep leaning on it this hard. And then trans, which we know almost nothing about, and our societies are pretending to be incredibly certain about. And if I can sum up the problem in this in a sentence, it is that this new morality we're trying to construct relies on us pretending we know about things that we don't know about, trans, and simultaneously demands that we pretend not to know about things that we all knew till yesterday, relations between the sexes.
It's very interesting to me that you clearly spell out the thing that you've just said in the book on gays, that there are enormous differences within each grouping under their heading, so gays, lesbians, and so forth, and enormous differences, even frictions between them.
Yes.
And in many ways, it's, I would imagine, quite deeply resented. I mean, during the gay marriage debate in Australia, anybody who was watching the debate closely could see there was quite a range of views in the gay community,
Right.
Quite a range.
Sure.
And in fact, there were quite a few who said, we've never believed in marriage. Why would we want to do it?
Yeah, there were some who said, yeah.
But of course, you didn't see that in the media. It didn't suit the narrative. You've got other people, it seems, often using, in inverted commas, these groupings that they've put together.
Yeah, the woke ideology looks to group people in a detrimental way. It's like the blacks, the gays, the women's, it's like entire subsects of the population. It doesn't allow for individuality. It doesn't allow for free thought. And I found that out real fast when I started to think for myself. God forbid not be so far left leaning into, so deep into my black identity. And I started to question beyond that. I started to lose a lot of relationships, a lot of friends. It was real interesting to me to see that there were people who simply wanted to be in relationship with me so long as I believed in what they believed, so long as I thought what they thought. And it was worse than even those who are in a genuine religion, right? Which you would think, okay, Christian would no longer associate and affiliate with a non-Christian. I have never seen backlash like I've seen from when I was, in the very far left and I started stepping out of that space. All of a sudden, I was public enemy number one. I couldn't even question the things that we were all regurgitating to each other. And so that really showed me, so I'm only a protected group as a black man so long as I believe in what you believe. So the diversity isn't in what I look like, actually. It's just in, as long as I think what you think, then you're going to put on all the other accolades. But when that falls to waste, now I'm the problem. I've been called everything from Uncle Tom to a white supremacist. Imagine that. Imagine the surprise of me hearing that I'm a white supremacist. Just waking up one day, it's like, I've been black a long time, a long time. This ain't nothing new. I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. So waking up one day and realize I'm a white supremacist it was mind-blowing. Still blows my mind.
In inverted commas, these groupings that they've put together and insist are cogent and
Right.
hang together to pursue agendas of their own.
Well, often to pursue a specific political objective.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a piece in The Spectator in the UK in support of gay marriage before it was popular to be in support of gay marriage, and explained what I regard as being the conservative case for it, which was an article which David Cameron used as a basis for his first main speech on the issue. I defend it as a right, but I also am worried by, and have been worried for a long time, by the extraordinary intolerance of elements of the so-called gay community, which I say so-called because there is no such thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
So this is one of the interesting aspects of this. There must be there are a lot of gay people who don't want to be defined by their sexuality.
Well, just
they
like-
are
yeah.
a whole heap of other things.
Yeah.
They're citizens. They might be Boilermakers. They might be city executives or what have you. But suddenly there's an insistence that they define themselves.
Yeah, and this has come in very recently, and it's come in each of the ones I describe, and it's a basis for madness. When people say the gay community, who are you talking about? It's like women think this. Oh, really? 50% of the species all agree on something. Blacks say this. Really? Now, this is, let me put it another way. If somebody said, I don't know, I just love the working class. Who?
Yeah.
I just love the middle class. Who? I love the upper class. Who are you talking about? And it's the same with this. Why would we be falling for this interpretation of society as depending solely or primarily on interest groups based on gender/sex, sexual orientation, race, and a bit more? Why would we be doing that? Why would we be taking the individualism out of individuals and lumping them in these demonstrably incoherent bodies that don't even exist? They don't even exist. The LGBT community. Take me to your leader. Come on.
I suppose in a way, in public office, the thing that would have struck me about so much of this is that it actually ends up dividing us hopelessly. Yes. So we're forever focusing on our differences, on the things that divide.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, if racism were to completely disappear tomorrow, these people would be out of business. Sexism, homophobia. I'm so used to just the isms. Excuse me for those who are politically correct. All the isms, if they all disappeared tomorrow, this entire structure would crumble upon itself. It's kind of like California and homelessness, right? They've created an entire homeless complex, like an entire industry. There are billions of dollars that go to homelessness. It sounds counterintuitive, but that's the reason why it has been more profitable until now, obviously, because now everything is, fallen, crumbled to the wayside. And this is from a California resident. So I'm speaking not from YouTube videos, but instead from my own personal experience, is when you have a system that benefits off of people suffering, and I'm actually going to do a video on this more specific subject of how these sort of ideologies are really used as a means to also further along other capitalistic systems. I'm not an anti-capitalist, but some of y'all love y'all socialist, communist belief systems, and yet this is pushing a narrative for money. Crony capitalism, the worst sort of capitalism in existence, which is buddy-buddy with government and looks to, protect a certain group and only have a certain group rise up, etc. So, yeah, that's a real quandary for me, to say the least. But we're gonna continue on this conversation, and we'll see where we go. We only got like 3 minutes left, so we're gonna get to it, get my conclusion, and then we'll wrap.
Rather than the things that unite us and that we have in common.
What if that's the point?
Well,
what if that's the point?
Yeah. So that's your second chapter is really on
the Marxists.
On the Marx.
Did my best, but it was only 5 seconds go by. What if that's the point? That's exactly what I was getting to. What if it is the point to continue to perpetuate the very same systems? I say if we want to get rid of racism, it's easy. We stop focusing on it. It's like anything else. If you want, to strip the attention away from somebody who is throwing a tantrum, you strip them of your attention. So if we stop giving something our attention, stop focusing on it, and we instead progressed in other things, then that thing would eradicate, it would remove itself. Yet these very same people who claim to be fighting for said racism, sexism, etc., are the very ones who view the world in that lens. So if it was to go tomorrow, they would have nothing else to stand on. I want to assume ignorance before malice. I want to believe that they're doing it unconsciously, but there feels like there is some sort of intentional aspect to it. And I'm not going to say it makes you an evil person, but we really have to wake up if we want something different, yo.
Marxist thing. Now, this pulling together of disparate groups who have grievances that can be stoked and sort of, if you like, used as battering rams for political objectives, often without them probably even realising that in a sense they're being used, that perhaps they're the modern version of Lenin's useful idiots.
Yeah, there's a pattern in all of this. As I say in that chapter, you can see the intellectual underpinnings, and they come from this idea that it's a Marxist idea, but it's just transferred to the modern era, where instead of talking about society in class structures, you talk about it in minority interest group structures, and you lump people like this. What is the primary aim of this? Among other things, it is a different interpretation of society, which is therefore intended to segregate and pull apart societies as you and I might understand them, so that people's primary affiliation is not that I'm an Australian, or I'm British, but I'm a member of the LGBT community in the Greater Sydney area, for instance. You can predict with 100% accuracy the people who encourage this, the people who will grab the latest claim by an interest group and run with it. And it is always people who in the past had another way of trying to attack our societies, had a radical Marxist view of the world, for instance. We know this with the green issue, where, and again, like the rights issues I write about in this book, they succeed because they're not onto nothing, you know. The green movement is onto something with the environment and with our planet. But it has this hideous red interior which keeps exposing itself as desiring not a better relationship between ourselves and our environment, but, for instance, the end of capitalism. And it's the same with this. I expose in each of the chapters that the people who make it repeatedly and desperately plain, that they believe, for instance, that being a woman should be merely the first step in a wider mission to bring down capitalism. Now, I don't think most women are on board with that, and most women would be rather surprised to be utilized in this fashion. But that is very clearly and explicitly, and I quote the various scholars and writers who've been pushing this for years, this is explicitly the aim. And it's why, as I say, you can always predict exactly who is going to latch onto the latest claim. When, for instance, the big bearded man with male genitalia wins the women's weightlifting competition, you can predict with 100% accuracy who is going to say, yeah, what's the problem with that? And the people who are going to say, I'm not sure Clive, the big weightlifter, should be winning the women's category. You can predict it. And the people who say, why have you got a problem with that, bigot, are always the same people who believed in the past that our societies needed to be pulled apart in another fashion. And now they'd like to do it in this fashion.
That's a powerful point to end off. So my closing statement is going to be real simple, real straightforward. We got to start thinking for ourselves. Simple as that. Even if we're disagreeing, if your opinion is the complete opposite, we have to be able to have these conversations out loud. Because for too long, we've stayed silent. We've been afraid of what somebody would not even just say or think, but instead of even being canceled, right? Removed from this ecosystem. And so the silent majority which is most people are really thinking like something is a problem, something is wrong, something is off, but we go along to get along because we fear the loud minority. It might be 5% of the crowd who is yelling and throwing this tantrum, and we go along with it because we're afraid of that 5% retaliating against us, not understanding that if you stand on truth, the truth always stands. I'm gonna run that back one more time. If you stand on truth, the truth always stands. So that means you're always going to be founded on solid ground. Like the old saying goes, when you stand for something, you don't fall for just anything. Or when you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. And that's what happens to a majority of individuals when it comes to this shift of guard that's taking place. We're shifting from morality, which is baked into our DNA. It's baked into our structure, who we are. It's within us. We were created with this genuine understanding and reasonable logic, this reasonable morality, as opposed to this illogical sense of, whimsical morality that we're creating for ourselves. This subjective idea of what is right and what is wrong. And I've fallen into the gutter when it came to some of these ideas, where it's like there is no right, there is no wrong, right? It's all subjective. When in truth, there is truth and there is the lie. And unfortunately, again, because most of us have feared speaking out, even within our own families, within our own, small little cohorts, that these things continue to perpetuate. So the only thing I can really leave with is speak the truth. When you have something on your heart, when you have something on your mind, the only way you can protect your right to free speech is by using your right of free speech. Even if the consequence of that is going to mean ostracization, because if you're being ostracized, first, you're going to see that those individuals don't really care about you. And I wouldn't want to be around anybody who isn't there to be in relationship with me, but instead with the ideology that mirrors their own. So that's the first thing. And secondly, you'll come to realize that you are actually not alone. There are many of us out here. I used to think I was alone in my belief systems. I lived in the Bay Area, in the middle of Babylon itself. And because I didn't say anything, because I became so afraid to speak out, because I saw the initial reaction, I didn't come to realize until much later on, years later, that it wasn't just me. So that being said, appreciate you guys. Till the next time, peace.
I used to be afraid of the dark, place unknown like a heart in their heart. I used to see my life in the bar. Now the kids unchained, every shackle is lost. 2 steps in the moonlight, 2 step in the daytime. You just know when it feel right. You got a feeling the time's not. See you through those shades that I just threw on. Through my lenses, you just can't do no wrong. I fell in love with myself again. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking. A 365, that's a